Well, this makes Jed Clampett look like a piker. An oil treasure has been found beneath the desert in West Texas. The latest U.S. Geological Survey report found the largest discovery ever in the United States. It's a $900 billion pool of black gold in the field known as the Wolfcamp Formation. What does this mean for U.S. oil independence, especially ahead of the OPEC meeting on November 30th? Oil expert Andy Lipow, president of Lipow Oil Associates, here now with your take on this monster oil find. I mean, the biggest ever. What does this mean for prices and for pushing OPEC to the limit?
Well, this is really good news for the United States, and let me put it in perspective. This find is triple the size of the oil that the Geological Survey found in North Dakota in the Bakken Formation, where we're producing 1 million barrels a day. So you can just imagine, as the oil companies start drilling rigs and getting that oil out of the ground in West Texas and getting it to the market, the consumer here is going to continue to benefit, and it's going to continue to help the United States, who, by the way, is still importing 7 to 8 million barrels a day of crude oil, to mitigate those imports.
Okay, so as you look at that, can we automatically assume that because this find is so gigantic that we will start to see prices fall once again, because they've had a couple of decent days here?
Well, I wouldn't assume that, because the production is still probably around 12 or 18 months away. Okay. You know, we saw earlier in September, Apache announced a 3 billion barrel find in West Texas. They're going to start producing in 2017. But the big news for the consumer is to watch what happens on November 30th at the upcoming OPEC meeting.
Okay, well, let's get to that. What is going to happen November 30th? And by the way, just because the Russians said, and you know, you talk about Alexander Novak, who's their oil minister, I've heard this gentleman say over and over again, we support this, and then their oil companies, which are very much controlled by at least part of the government, Putin, say, well, we're not going to stop production. How do you get the Russians on the same page here?
Well, I think they're all really talking a good story, and what you see is the OPEC oil ministers are talking about a freeze and production cuts. But the fact of the matter is, tomorrow we're going to have the Saudis meeting with the Russians in Doha and Qatar. But ironically, the two big producers, Iran and Iraq, are not going to be there, and they're the ones who are adding a significant amount of supply. So we have a split already within OPEC about who's going to freeze, who's going to cut. The market, I expect, we're going to see some freeze agreement on November 30th, but I remain hugely skeptical about whether their words are going to meet their actions and whether they're actually going to cut production.
Well, we can't control anything they do, but we know here in the U.S. that President-elect Donald Trump has said he wants to open all federal land to drilling. That only increases the supply. Look, today alone, we got inventories that far outweighed what was expected. Donald Trump says one thing, President Obama says completely different things. In fact, he has just said that he would prevent oil and gas drilling rights in Arctic waters. He's set to block that sale. So more gridlock here. But when you have fines on Texas land, that is only going to add to the supply, and it could be a case for the oil patch of be careful what you wish for, you're getting it.
Well, they're certainly getting more oil, and as everyone is aware of, Texas is a very friendly oil-producing state, so I expect that oil to come out of the ground and get to the refineries here on the Gulf Coast and ultimately to the consumer as gasoline and diesel. So it is good news for the consumer, and as I say, you know, for the oil companies, they do get a lot of oil. It adds to the supply. But the fact is that world oil demand continues to grow, and it's going to continue to grow by 1 million barrels a day this year as well as next year.
Okay, but, you know, we're about to see an electric SUV by Jaguar, Andy. You should stay tuned for that. It doesn't need gasoline, so we'll be watching that. Andy, great to see you. Thank you so much.
For 20 billion barrels, that's what could be the largest untapped oil deposit ever just discovered in Texas. The find in the Midland Basin is worth an estimated $900 billion. Look out, Saudi Arabia, we're coming for you.
This is a special report, again, like the Hillary Clinton thing. The energy crisis written in 1979, because at that point in time, we had Jimmy Carter. The country was suffering from stagflation. There was a general malaise, as they pointed out, from Jimmy Carter. No, the days of America are over. This was just before Ronald Reagan became president, folks. But no, we were told the best days of America were behind us. There was nothing to look forward to. Everything was moving to Japan, and we were going to run out of oil. And we're going to show you when we come back. I want you guys to focus in on this graph here. Look at this. Crude oil, 1979. We've only got 8.7 years left. Not 8 years, not 9 years, 8.7. These guys know it exactly, just like they know that we're going to have, well, they know we're going to have 1 or 2 degrees of increased temperature, and it's going to destroy the world. Why? Because of their models. We'll be right back.
Science.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight with Leanne McAdoo. We've been talking about fake news. And we're going to talk a little bit more about fake news. Look at this 37-year-old report from Newsweek about how we're going to run out of oil. But before we do that, I don't want to put this in context with some real news. The real news today, you'll see this on the Drudge Report, is the discovery of the biggest shale oil field in the U.S. ever. They found 20 billion barrels of oil in West Texas. They say it's 3 times larger than North Dakota's Bakken oil fields. It's the largest U.S. unconventional crude accumulation ever assessed. They estimate the proven reserves that they've just announced at being $900 billion. Now, they believe that in that area, some geologists have said, they believe there's as much as 75 billion barrels of oil. So that means that they've acknowledged 1/4 of what they believe may eventually be there. At least one source, the Pioneer Natural Resources CEO, said that. If that were true, if it were 75 billion barrels of oil, and that's B with a billion with a B, okay? That would be second only to Saudi Arabia's largest field. So that would be the second largest reserve in the world. And of course, when it comes to coal that Obama and Hillary Clinton wanted to destroy, America has far more coal than Saudi Arabia has oil. So we are rich in natural resources here in America if we don't allow the left and the UN and the globalists to shut that down, to make us dependent, to tell us that we can't use it. That is why they are absolutely flipping out about Donald Trump. Because you want to talk about hoax? Talk about global warming, man-made global warming. That is the ultimate hoax. That is one of the key devices that they want to use to establish global governance. Because you have to have some way to pay for global governance. So you have to have an international crisis that takes a global government to solve. And then you have to be able to turn over money to that global government with a universal carbon tax or with redistribution of wealth, with these carbon credits. All of these are techniques that will need to be there for them to have a global government. They have to have the money in order to really have that power.
Well, let's not forget, I mean, they're not only disallowing us from using it, but they're also selling off our resources to foreign governments.
Yes, exactly.
Double whammy there.
And we should remember that it was the CIA, as well as people like George Bush and others, who sold us this idea a couple of decades ago that we had hit peak oil. And that's an idea that has been around with us a very long time. As a matter of fact, you know, if you go back and you look at the history, I read a book one time about the rise of John D. Rockefeller, okay? And it was during the Civil War. He was in Pennsylvania. He decided that he was not going to be drafted. He wasn't going to fight the war. He was going to make a fortune because they had used turpentine in the South to light their homes. They burned things in the home. They didn't have electricity, of course. And the supply of turpentine was cut off. But they did have this messy stuff in Pennsylvania called crude oil. And they realized that they could refine that and use that as a substitution for turpentine. So Rockefeller bought his way out of being drafted into the military, and he quickly cornered the refinery market in Pennsylvania, and he thought he had the world's supply of oil. At that time, they didn't know that it was just kind of bubbling out of the ground, you know, like the Beverly Hillbillies, you know. Out on the ground comes this bubbling crude. Okay, well, he was a Pennsylvania hillbilly billionaire. They thought that they had all the oil in the world there in Pennsylvania, and he cornered that market. And the only thing that stopped that was the discovery of oil in Texas. And so then he quickly moved his refinery business into Ohio to try to take advantage of the Texas and the Pennsylvania oil fields. Thought he had everything cornered at that point. Then they found it in the Middle East. It's like, darn, you know, every time I think I got a monopoly on this, they find it somewhere else. And then he was joined in all this. If you go back and you look at Wikipedia, they just had a few things there. 1919, David White, chief geologist of the U.S. Geological Survey, said, peak production of oil will be passed possibly within 3 years. He said that in 1919. Then you go forward to 1953. Eugene Ayers, researcher for Gulf Oil, projected the U.S. ultimate recoverable oil resources were 100 billion barrels. Then production of the U.S. would peak no later than 1960. Then Newsweek in 1979, this very issue right here, the energy crisis. We're running out of oil. I mean, there's even a great tune. I always love Tower Power, one of my favorite bands. I love the music, love the tune, but they had this song, there's only so much oil in the ground. No, that's not true. They were believing the mainstream media's fake news, their hoax news that was put out by the experts. See, they always argue from a position of expert. You should believe them when they tell you that we're going to have 1 degree of warming and the world is going to melt down. Here, these people were telling us in 8.7 years, we're going to be out of crude oil. In 10.7 years in 1979, 10.7 years from 1979, we were going to be out of natural gas. But of course, even then, they were telling us we have 666.5 years left of coal. So coal is pretty much an infinite supply, and we have ways that we can burn that cleanly. That's the key. And of course, it wasn't just Time. It was also Newsweek talking about the energy mess. Take a look at this. Guys, get a shot of this cover here. I saved these things. When I saw these, I told my wife, she was the one who had the subscription to these magazines, and I didn't really read general magazines like this. I always preferred to get left magazines or right magazines, and I said, I want to keep these because this is going to be priceless. And I think it is priceless. I think this is more valuable than the fake Hillary Clinton edition. But of course, here they're talking about the massive rise in price, and that's the point of the peak oil, is to make sure that they hold people hostage, that they blackmail us, that they get us involved in wars in the Middle East, that they control this just like De Beers controls the diamond exchange. They have a monopoly on that. These people who are selling us peak oil wanted to keep that. And think about where these CIA guys go. What did George Bush, the guy from the Northeast, the Harvard Skull and Bones guy, what did he do as he, with his CIA connections? Well, he set up Zapata Oil, which was involved in the Bay of Pigs fiasco. There's a couple of boats. They were named, one of them was named Zapata Oil. The other one was named Barbara. But of course, George Bush would tell you he was never involved with the CIA before they appointed him as the head of the CIA. Well, if you believe that, I've got a Newsweek magazine I could sell you. But it was also, we see the same thing happening with Dewhurst, who became lieutenant governor here in Texas, who single-handedly shut down the move that we had against the TSA. This is a guy who left the CIA after a couple of decades, then spends the most money that anybody has ever spent to become lieutenant governor. Why? Because he made a fortune in the oil business. So that's the way they make these. They're made men, okay? These gangsters, this dark state that is underneath us. And we need to understand who these guys are, because this is part of this color revolution. It isn't just George Soros. It's people on the right. We had an article from Kurt Nimmo 3 years ago talking about John McCain and the CIA and how they were involved with the color revolutions and the dark state. And they are as much a part of it as George Soros and the Democrats. And these are the mechanisms that they use in this. And so we see now also other articles that are on the Drudge Report today. Real news, Saudi Arabia is warning Trump not to block oil imports. Well, we don't need to block your oil imports. We got our own oil, Saudi. And they have been intricately linked in. They've been put in the position with Richard Nixon, put them in the position of controlling the petrodollar as he took us off of the gold standard. He made Saudi Arabia the people who underwrote our currency. And we have been interlinked with them as well as with the CIA. So this is the way that they have tried to control us. And they think they've got an agreement where they're going to be able to cut down their production and raise the price of oil. Guess what? That ain't going to happen, because we're going to start using American domestic oil. That's one of the things Donald Trump said he's going to do, and I can't wait to see that happen, Leanne.
Alex Jones here with a very important news update to anybody out there that wants to be prepared. But it goes beyond being prepared. Our bodies absolutely must have the good halogen iodine, or we will die. And you look at all of the thyroid problems and all the people that don't have energy and that have all sorts of hormone problems. And from my research, and a lot of just mainline research, it leads back to iodine over and over and over again. It's as important as vitamin C. If you don't get iodine, you die. But most people are just deficient, so they're low energy, they're sick. You got to have iodine in your body so that your body can produce the hormones you need. It is the base to so many things. And since I got into iodine 4 years ago, we've helped change the entire paradigm by developing and bringing to the public deep earth crystals from 7,000 to 12,000 feet of the purest iodine available. Other iodine comes from the ocean or from other byproducts of chemical facilities and is tainted. It's bound. It's not absorbable. I tried it. And I had incredible effects even with dirty iodine because the body needs it. When you don't have iodine, it absorbs the chlorine, the fluoride, and all these other bad halogens. It's such a game changer if you'll just research iodine for yourself. It's a fact that the federal government in the Midwest back in the 20s mandated a grungier form of iodine to the salt because people had low IQs, they had huge goiters, major problems directly connected to it. There are some studies that show a 15-point increase. Others show even higher. But it really is crazy to realize that this is something that is so deficient in our food chain, so deficient in our played out fields where different crops are being grown, but the federal government isn't educating people and telling them about it. That's why for a limited time, I want to encourage everyone to go to InfoWarsLife.com and get 20% off on the best nascent iodine out there from our research, truly pure Survival Shield X2. Again, that's Survival Shield Nascent Iodine X2. Thank you for joining us in this brief news update. Do yourself and your family a favor and check out the importance of iodine for yourself. I think you're going to be blown away. And whatever you do, support the broadcast and get a bottle of Survival Shield Nascent Iodine X2. Also consult your physician because if you've been deficient in it or have other issues, it can have some dramatic effects. As for me and most folks I talk to, it's been a game changer in the positive column, but still consult your physician because iodine is no joke. It's a key building block of the body. And if you haven't had it for a long time and suddenly have it, some folks say they've experienced things like a detoxing effect and things like that. You've got to have vitamin C. You've got to have iodine to live. You've got to have water to live. Iodine is key. You must have it, but consult your physician first before you get powerful Survival Shield Nascent Iodine X2 at InfoWarsLife.com or call toll free. We can answer your questions, 888-253-3139.